The morning Forbes called Harrison Caldwell the most powerful man in American healthcare. He was sitting in a hospital room, watching his 11-year-old son breathe through a machine. The irony wasn't lost on him. He built the largest pharmaceutical distribution network in the country. His company's drugs were in every hospital in 32 states, and not one of them could do a thing for Noah. It had started 8 months ago with a headache. Just a headache, the kind every kid gets on a Sunday afternoon when they've been staring at a screen too long. Harrison had given Noah 2 Tylenol and sent him to bed. But by Tuesday, the headache hadn't gone, and by Friday, Noah couldn't hold a pencil. The neurologist at Seattle Children's Hospital ordered the scan on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Harrison's world had quietly come apart. Progressive Neurological Degeneration Syndrome, PNDS. One of those acronyms that sounds almost manageable until the doctor explains what it means, that the myelin sheath protecting Noah's nerve fibers was breaking down systematically, like a house being eaten from the inside. No known cause, no reliable treatment, no cure. "We can slow it," Dr. Elaine Forsythe had told him that first week, her voice calibrated to that specific frequency doctors use when they're delivering information they know will destroy someone. "We cannot stop it." Harrison had nodded like a man hearing quarterly earnings projections. He had driven home, sat in his car in the garage for 40 minutes, and then gone inside to call his board of directors to postpone the Thursday meeting. That was 8 months ago. Since then, Noah had steadily retreated, from school, from soccer, from morning arguments about breakfast, from everything that made him Noah. He slept 14 hours a day now. His left hand trembled when he was awake. 3 weeks ago, he had stopped recognizing Harrison's face. The morning Harrison's assistant set the Forbes issue on his desk with a sticky note that read, "Congratulations, Mr. Caldwell." He had stared at his own photograph on the cover for a long time. Strong jaw, tailored suit, eyes that looked like they were used to winning. He didn't recognize that man either. He turned the magazine face down and went back to the hospital. His sister, Margot, had strong opinions about everything, and she had them about this too. "You need to let Dr. Forsythe refer him to Clearwater," she said one evening in the hospital corridor. She kept her voice low, which was how Harrison knew she'd been building to this for days. "It's a good facility. They specialize in long-term neurological care. The staff is. It's a facility where people go when other people have stopped trying. Harrison," she put her hand on his arm, "you have to be realistic." He looked at her hand. He had always loved Margot. She was the person who drove 3 hours to sit with him after his divorce, who mailed Noah birthday cards with $20 bills, tucked inside every single year without fail. But in that moment, in that corridor that smelled of antiseptic and cafeteria food, he could not find 1 inch of space inside himself to be realistic. "Not yet, Hest." She left an hour later. He went back into Noah's room and sat down in the chair that had permanent indentations from the shape of him by now. Noah slept, the machine breathed. The monitors made their small, patient sounds. Harrison thought about all the things money was supposed to fix. He first noticed the girl on a Tuesday. She was sitting on the floor in the corridor outside the pediatric ward. Cross-legged, back against the wall, a composition notebook open on her knees. She was writing in it furiously, her tongue pressed between her teeth, completely oblivious to the nurses moving around her. Her hair was in 2 uneven braids that suggested she'd done them herself. She wore a gray hoodie that was a size too big, with Eastfield Elementary printed across the front in letters that had cracked and faded from too many washes. Harrison had stepped around her without thinking much of it. Kids waited in hospital corridors all the time, siblings of patients mostly. He saw her again on Wednesday, same spot, same notebook. On Thursday, she was standing at the window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the parking structure. And she turned when she heard his footsteps and looked at him with the kind of directness that children either grow out of or never have in the first place. "Is your kid the one in room 14? She asked. Harrison stopped. "Excuse me, I heard you talking to the doctor last night." Through the door, she didn't look embarrassed about this. "I sleep in the waiting room sometimes. The walls are thin." "You sleep here?" "My mom works nights. Custodial. I'm not supposed to be here past 8, but Nurse Delgado lets me stay." She shrugged one shoulder. "I'm Petra Harrison." She nodded like she'd already known this. "Your son has PNDS, right? My grandmother had something like that. Different name, but the same idea. nerves breaking down. Harrison looked at this child, 10 years old, maybe 11, telling him clinical information about his son's diagnosis in a hospital corridor at 9 in the evening like it was nothing. "Where did you hear that term?" I read. She held up the composition notebook. It was filled, he could see, with dense handwriting and small, careful diagrams. "A lot. Also, I listen. Also," she said this carefully, like she was testing the weight of it, "my grandmother got better." He should have walked away. He was Harrison Caldwell. He had 3 neurologists, a medical advisory board, and access to experimental protocols that weren't available to the general public. He did not need medical opinions from a child who slept in hospital waiting rooms. "The doctors said there was nothing left to try," he said. He wasn't sure why he said it. Petra looked at him steadily. "That's what they said about my grandmother, too." He didn't think about the conversation again until Saturday, when Dr. Forsyth asked to meet with him in her office. She had the kind of face that was naturally kind and had learned, over years, to be careful with that kindness, to ration it, to keep it professional. She folded her hands on the desk. "Harrison." She never called him Mr. Caldwell, which he had come to understand was a form of respect. She was talking to him as a person, not a patient's guardian. "We've exhausted the standard protocol." The experimental trial in Denver had its final enrollment 6 weeks ago, and Noah's most recent scans show accelerated progression. She paused. "I want to be honest with you. The trajectory we're seeing, I don't want you to be caught off guard." He looked at the framed print on her wall. Monet's water lilies, the pale blue one, not the famous red. He had a print almost exactly like it in his own office at Caldwell Medical Group, 34 floors above downtown Seattle. "How long?" he asked. He had asked this before, and she had not answered. Today she answered. He drove home after that and stood in his kitchen for a long time. He called his housekeeper, Agnes, and told her she could take the rest of the day. He opened a bottle of scotch that a business partner had given him 2 Christmases ago and poured 2 fingers and sat at the kitchen island and did not drink it. Then he drove back to the hospital. Petra was in the corridor, same spot, same notebook. "Can I see what you're writing?" he asked. She looked up. Then, without ceremony, she flipped the notebook around and held it out. It was dense, a combination of notes copied from medical journals. He could tell by the precision of the terminology, hand-drawn diagrams of neural pathways, and what appeared to be detailed records, dates, observations, a chart with columns labeled treatment, response day, notes. "This is your grandmother's case," he said. 18 months of it. Petra pulled the notebook back. "She was in a hospital in Guadalajara. The doctor there said the same thing your doctor said. 6 months, maybe 8. What happened?" Petra was quiet for a moment. She seemed to be deciding something. "My great-aunt Celestina came from a village in Oaxaca. She's been using plant medicine her whole life. Not like random herbs, but actual knowledge. Generations of it." She said this carefully, watching him. "She started coming every day. She brought things. She worked with Grandma's hands and feet, pressure points, range of motion, specific sequences. She sang to her. Same songs every day, same time." She paused. It sounds like it shouldn't work. I know how that sounds." She met his eyes. "My grandmother walked out of that hospital 14 months later. She lives in Phoenix now. She teaches ceramics." Harrison was quiet. He was a man who had built his career on evidence-based medicine, on peer-reviewed trials and FDA approval pathways and the specific measurable language of clinical data. Every trained instinct in him was preparing the counter-arguments. But Dr. Forsyth had just told him how long he had. "What were the pressure points?" he asked. He did not tell Dr. Forsyth. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps because he knew what she would say, and he wasn't ready to hear it said by someone who would say it so carefully and so kindly. Petra's mother was named Vivienne. Harrison met her on a Monday morning, just after 7, when the night shift staff were handing off to the day crew. She was small, barely 5 feet, with the same dark eyes as Petra and the kind of tired that lives in a person's bones after too many years of not enough sleep. She wore blue scrubs and carried a mop handle like a walking staff. She did not seem surprised to find Harrison Caldwell waiting for her. "My daughter told me about your boy," she said. "She told me about your mother." Vivienne studied him for a long moment. There was no hostility in it. Just the particular careful assessment of a woman who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. "My daughter is not a doctor," she said. "I know. What she knows, she learned from watching Celestina and from reading everything she could get her hands on since she was 6 years old. She is. Vivian stopped. Something moved across her face. She is an unusual child. I've noticed. And you understand, there are no guarantees. What happened with my mother, no one can explain it completely. Maybe it was Celestina. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was. She turned her hands up. We don't know. Dr. Forsyth told me yesterday that my son has between 3 and 5 months. Vivienne closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had settled in her expression. A decision, quiet and complete. I'll call Celestina tonight, she said. Celestina arrived on a Thursday. She was 71 years old, with white hair pulled back in a bun and hands that looked like they had spent 7 decades in active use, calloused, capable, slightly arthritic, and completely steady. She carried a canvas bag that smelled of things Harrison couldn't identify. She spoke almost no English. Petra translated. She wants to know if she can touch him. Petra said that first afternoon, standing at the foot of Noah's bed. Yes, Harrison said. Celestina moved to Noah's side with a slowness that was not hesitation but deliberateness, the way a person moves when they are paying full attention to every step. She set her bag down. She placed both hands on Noah's forearm very lightly and was still for almost a full minute. Then she turned and said something in Spanish. She says he is still very present, Petra translated. Her voice was quiet. She says some people, when they get like this, they start to go away inside. She says he hasn't gone away. Harrison sat very still. She says she can try, Petra said. She's not promising anything. She just says she'll try. They came every day. Celestina's method was not dramatic. Harrison had half expected something that would feel like theater. Candles, chanting, something he could dismiss. What she actually did was methodical in a way that reminded him, unexpectedly, of the physical therapist he'd worked with after his knee surgery years ago. She worked Noah's fingers, his hands, his wrists, slow, deliberate movements, specific sequences, always the same order. She applied pressure to points along his feet and the base of his skull that she identified with a certainty that suggested a map Harrison couldn't see. And she sang. Not performance singing, nothing like that. It was quiet and rhythmic, almost under her breath, the same melody repeated over and over, a simple looping pattern that Petra said was from a lullaby her grandmother's grandmother had sung in Oaxaca. It had no drama in it. It sounded like something very old and very patient, like water that had been finding its way through stone for a long time. Noah did not wake up, but on the 4th day, when Celestina was working on his left hand, his fingers closed, just slightly, just for a moment around her thumb. The monitor didn't change. Nothing about the room changed. But Celestina looked up at Harrison with an expression he didn't have a word for and said something in Spanish. Petra was quiet for a second. She says, "Good morning, sweetheart," Petra said softly. Harrison had to leave the room. He stood in the corridor with his back against the wall and his hand over his mouth, and for the first time in 8 months, he let himself feel something that wasn't iron-hard control. It moved through him like a current. He didn't know what it was. Hope is a strange and frightening thing when you've been carefully keeping it out, and when it gets back in, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like breaking. He was still standing there when Petra came out. She stood next to him and didn't say anything for a while. My grandmother used to say that the body knows things the mind forgets, Petra said eventually. She said sickness sometimes happens when the two stop talking to each other. Harrison wiped his face with the back of his hand. He was not a man who cried in public, had not been for most of his adult life. He found, standing in that corridor, that he didn't particularly care about that anymore. "How old are you?" he asked. 11, Petra said. "You're going to be remarkable," he said, "whatever you decide to do." She thought about this seriously, the way she thought about everything. "I want to be a doctor," she said. "A real one, but the kind that knows both things." Dr. Forsyth ordered a new round of scans 3 weeks in. Because the nursing staff had flagged something, Noah's response times were changing. Nothing dramatic, a tremor that had decreased, a reflex that had returned. She presented this to Harrison in the same measured tone she used for everything, but he could see that she was being careful in a different way. Careful the way people are when they don't want to say something and know they should. "These results are," she stopped. "They're not what the trajectory predicted. What does that mean?" "It means I don't fully understand what's happening." She looked at him steadily. "I'd like to document everything you've been doing, all of it. I'm not. Another pause. I'm not dismissing it. I want to understand it. Harrison sat back. The pressure point work. There's actually some documentation on manual neural stimulation showing effects on. I know, she said. I looked it up. After Nurse Delgado mentioned what she'd been observing. She folded her hands. Harrison, I've been a neurologist for 22 years. I've told more parents than I can count that there was nothing left to do. She was quiet for a moment. I don't like being wrong, but I would very much like to be wrong about this. Noah woke up on a Tuesday morning in November, 41 days after Celestina first walked into his room. He didn't wake up all at once. It was gradual, like a light slowly being raised. Awareness before cognition, cognition before speech. He lay with his eyes open for almost an hour before he turned his head and looked at the man sitting in the chair by his bed. The chair with the permanent indentations, and said, his voice rough from disuse, "Dad, you look terrible." Harrison laughed. It came out wrong, too loud, too sudden, but Noah smiled anyway, slow and a little confused but completely, unmistakably Noah. "Yeah," Harrison managed. "Yeah, I know." He pressed the call button for the nurse. His hand was shaking. The recovery was not instant or linear. There were bad days. Days when the fog came back thicker. When Noah's hand trembled again, when Harrison sat in the corridor and reminded himself that a line on a chart goes up and down before it goes up for good. Celestina and Vivienne came every day. Petra sat with Noah and read to him from her composition notebooks, not the medical notes, but the other sections, the ones where she'd copied down poetry and song lyrics and excerpts from books she liked. Noah, it turned out, had opinions about poetry, mostly negative, which meant he was definitely getting better. 3 months after he woke up, Dr. Forsyth cleared him for limited mobility. Harrison stood in the doorway of Noah's room and watched his son take 7 careful, deliberate steps across the floor with a physical therapist at his side, and felt something happen in his chest that he didn't try to name. On the last day of Noah's inpatient stay, Harrison found Vivienne before her shift ended. "I want to pay for Petra's education," he said. "All of it medical school, whatever she needs. I'm not asking for anything in return. I understand you might not want, Mr. Caldwell," Vivienne said. "Harrison," she looked at him, the same careful reading look she'd had the first morning. "I'll talk to Petra," she said. "It's her life. She gets to decide." He nodded. "But I want you to know something," Vivienne said. She set down the mop handle. "When Petra told me about your son, I almost said no. I've had people look at us like we don't know things because of—" She stopped, chose different words. "People see what we look like, what we earn, where we live. And they think that's the whole picture." "I know," Harrison said. "I was one of those people." She looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "You were. And then, after a moment, you're doing better." He didn't argue with her. He brought Noah home on a Friday in February. The house felt different. Not changed, but clarified. The way things look when you come back to them after being afraid you'd never see them again. Agnes had left a casserole in the refrigerator and flowers on the counter. Yellow ones. Noah stood in the front hallway and looked around like he was inventorying everything that was still there. "Dad," he said. "Yeah? I'm hungry." Harrison laughed. The good kind this time, the kind that comes out right. He put his arm around his son's shoulders, careful of the weakness that was still there, and steered him toward the kitchen. "Agnes made her chicken thinkings," he said. "The one with the—" "Okay," Noah said. "Yeah, okay." They sat at the kitchen island, the same island where Harrison had poured the scotch he never drank, and ate Agnes's casserole and didn't talk about hospitals or doctors or the months that were gone. Outside the window, February light lay flat and silver over the city. Somewhere across town, Petra was in school, filling another composition notebook with her careful handwriting, learning everything she could about both kinds of medicine, the kind that reads the charts and the kind that remembers what the charts can't measure. Harrison thought about that. He thought about a woman of 71 with calloused hands and a canvas bag, singing the same patient melody into her room where Hope had been very carefully asked to leave. He thought about how much he hadn't known, how much certainty he'd carried like currency, spending it freely, never checking the balance, and how it took a child on a hospital floor with a composition notebook to show him what he'd been missing. Noah pushed his plate back. "Can we watch something tonight?" "Whatever you want," Harrison said. It was the truest thing he'd said in years.